Amelia Quinn sat at her father's old mahogany desk, the same desk she had spent years working behind as a child. The leather-bound books on the shelves, the old brass lamp with its dim yellow light, the faded pictures of her family, all of it was a reminder of the life she had worked so hard to build. A life that was now crumbling beneath her. The debts were overwhelming, the creditors relentless, and no matter how many late nights she spent poring over contracts and financial reports, there didn't seem to be any way out. Her father's textile business had once been a cornerstone of their family's wealth. He had built it from the ground up, making deals with international suppliers and bringing in massive profits. Amelia had always admired her father's ability to navigate the business world with such precision. She had learned from him, shadowing him for years, absorbing his wisdom and strategies. She had taken over the company when he passed away suddenly, just a few months ago. Since then, it had felt like she had been fighting a losing battle. The weight of the business, the pressure of keeping it afloat, was crushing her. She could feel the weight of the phone bill in her hand, the final notice from one of the creditors who had given her a few extra weeks to pay. It was like a constant ticking clock in the back of her mind. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to losing everything. And then there was the looming possibility of bankruptcy, the fear of seeing her father's legacy fall into the hands of someone else, someone who might not care for it the way she did. "Think, Amelia. Think," she muttered under her breath as she shuffled through another stack of papers. It had been hours since she last took a break, and her eyes were starting to blur. She rubbed them, hoping to stave off the exhaustion that had been building inside her for weeks. Her thoughts were interrupted by the buzzing of her phone. She glanced at the screen, seeing an unfamiliar number. Hesitant but curious, she answered. "Ms. Quinn, this is Tobias Stone," a deep voice said on the other end of the line. "I have a business proposal for you." Tobias Stone. The name sent a shiver down her spine. He was a self-made billionaire, known for his ruthless business tactics and cold demeanor. Everyone in the city knew who he was. He had made his fortune in real estate, and he was not a man to cross. His empire stretched from skyscrapers in the heart of the city to international ventures that seemed to pop up overnight. He was a man who had everything, and then some. "I'm listening," Amelia replied, her tone cautious. "I'm aware of your situation, Miss Quinn," Tobias said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I know about the debts you've incurred and the trouble your company is facing. And I also know you're out of options." Amelia froze. She hadn't expected her financial struggles to be so well known. She had kept things quiet, tried to handle it on her own, but apparently, Tobias had eyes everywhere. She didn't like the idea of being so exposed, but at the same time, there was something almost comforting about his directness. "You've been doing your best to save the business, but you're running out of time," Tobias continued, his words cutting through the silence. "I can offer you a solution, an opportunity to clear your debts once and for all." Amelia's mind raced, but she stayed silent, waiting for him to explain. "I'll pay off every cent of your debt," Tobias said, his words final. "I'll handle everything. Your creditors will be gone. The company will be saved. But there's a condition." "A condition?" Of course there was a condition. Nothing in life came without strings attached, especially not from someone like Tobias Stone. Amelia's mind began to whirl. What could he possibly want from her? Her business? Her assets? Her soul? It didn't matter how desperate she wasn't about to sell her dignity. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice firm, though she could feel a knot tighten in her stomach. There was a brief pause before Tobias spoke again. "In exchange for clearing your debts, I want something very simple from you. I want you to have a child for me." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "What?" she exclaimed, her mind reeling. "What did you just say?" Tobias's voice was calm, almost as though he were stating a simple fact. "I want you to conceive a child for me. Just one night, one time. After that, you're free to go, and I'll make sure you never have to worry about anything again." Your debts will be erased, your company will be saved, and you can walk away with your life. Amelia was in shock. The audacity of the offer, the cold, clinical way he spoke about it, it took everything in her not to hang up the phone immediately. How could he think she would agree to something like that? It felt like a sick joke. And yet, beneath her disbelief, there was a flicker of realization. She was running out of options, and what he was offering, no matter how appalling, was her only chance to save everything. The company. The legacy. Why me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you want me? Tobias's reply was quick, his tone slightly amused. Because you're a woman who is willing to fight for what she loves, even if it means making difficult choices. And because you don't have another option, Amelia. You're trapped. The word stung. He was right. She had been fighting this battle on her own for so long, and now, at the edge of losing everything, here was a man who was offering her a way out, a way to save the company, her father's legacy. The price, however, was steep. Amelia's mind raced. She had always prided herself on her independence, on never relying on anyone, especially a man like Tobias Stone. But the reality of her situation was undeniable. The debts, the mounting pressure, she was suffocating under the weight of it all. Give me one night, Tobias continued, his voice smooth, almost persuasive. One night, and you'll never have to worry about your company or your future again. Think of it as a transaction. One that benefits us both. Amelia sat back in her chair, her thoughts spinning. What kind of life would she be left with after this? Could she really go through with it, knowing the price she would have to pay? Was her father's company, his legacy, worth it? I need time to think about this, she said, though she knew deep down that there wasn't much time left. Tobias was silent for a moment, and then, almost too calmly, he said, I'll give you 24 hours. But remember, this is your only chance. Don't let it slip away. The line went dead, and Amelia sat there in the silence, her mind reeling. How could she even consider this? How could she agree to such a thing? Yet, in the back of her mind, the weight of her responsibilities, the desperation clawing at her, kept pulling her back to his offer. One night. That's all it would take. As the reality of the situation settled over her, Amelia knew that the choice she made next would change the course of her life forever. The morning after the phone call was a blur. Amelia barely slept, her mind racing with the conversation that had unfolded the night before. Tobias Stone's words echoed in her head, reverberating like a drumbeat she couldn't escape. One night, and you'll never have to worry about your company again. The thought of such an arrangement, of trading her dignity for financial security, felt like a cruel joke. And yet, deep down, a part of her understood the gravity of her situation. Her father's company was crumbling, and no matter how much effort she put into keeping it afloat, she was losing the battle. The creditors were at her door, and the banks were pulling back their support. Amelia had exhausted all of her options, she had borrowed from every available source, stretched every contract to its breaking point, and even mortgaged her personal assets. The fact that Tobias Stone knew all of this only made it worse. He had been watching her, studying her every move, until he knew exactly when to swoop in with his offer. She had spent the night pacing her small apartment, wrestling with herself, trying to find a way to fix the mess she had found herself in. But nothing came to mind that didn't involve more borrowing, more favors, more risk. The only solution that presented itself was Tobias's. One night, one child, and then everything would be erased. The debts, the shame, the constant pressure, it would all go away. But at what cost? Amelia sat at the kitchen table the next morning, her fingers wrapped tightly around the mug of coffee that had long since cooled. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, her face pale and drawn. She looked like someone who had aged years in the last few months, her eyes sunken with exhaustion and worry. She was only in her late 20s, but she felt much older. Her father's legacy, everything she had worked so hard to build, was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Except, maybe, what Tobias had proposed. She closed her eyes, willing the thoughts to leave her mind, but they clung to her like an anchor, dragging her under the weight of what she had to decide. She had never been one to make decisions based on emotions, never let herself be swayed by fleeting feelings. She had always relied on logic, on strategy. But this was different. She didn't know if it was desperation or if it was something more sinister that was driving her to even consider Tobias's offer. She couldn't shake the image of him, tall and imposing, sitting across from her the night before. His presence was magnetic, his confidence overwhelming. Tobias had a way of making people feel both insignificant and indispensable all at once. There had been a coldness in his eyes when he spoke, a calculated precision that sent a chill through her. But then there was that flicker, just a flicker, that she saw when he looked at her. A glimpse of something that was almost human. She couldn't quite place it, but it made her wonder if there was more to him than just the businessman everyone feared. But then again, maybe that was just a facade. Maybe he was just as ruthless as they said. Her phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her assistant, Rachel. Amelia's stomach dropped as she opened the text. "We've received another demand letter from the bank. The deadline is looming. They want a decision by Friday." The weight of the words pressed down on her chest, and she felt a wave of panic surge through her. Friday. 3 days. That was all the time she had before her father's company was gone for good. The realization hit her hard, there was no more time to waste. She needed a solution, and she needed it now. Tobias's offer was still hanging in the air, too tempting, too easy, yet too horrifying to accept. She could picture it, the finality of it. One night, one child, and her financial troubles would be over. She would walk away from him, from the deal, and never have to look back. But what would she have left? A child, yes, but what kind of life would it be? She couldn't ignore the fact that, no matter how pragmatic the solution seemed, it was still a personal violation. It was something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The sound of the buzzer at her apartment door startled her, and she jumped in her seat. Who could that be? She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she was met with Rachel's apologetic face. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a heavy sigh. "Amelia, I don't know how to tell you this, but, the pressure's building. The investors are getting anxious, and the banks aren't waiting much longer. You've got to make a decision. You can't keep dodging this." Amelia nodded, rubbing her forehead in frustration. She had been hoping for a miracle, but she knew deep down that the only miracle left was Tobias's offer. She turned to Rachel, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I don't have any other options, Rachel. I'm running out of time." Rachel's eyes widened as she pieced together the implication. "Wait, are you saying you're considering him? Tobias Stone?" Amelia didn't answer immediately. She didn't know how to explain it. How could she? How could she tell her assistant that she was considering giving herself to a stranger, to a man whose motivations were shrouded in mystery, in exchange for a chance at saving her father's company? "I don't have much of a choice," Amelia finally said, her voice low. "I need this, Rachel. I need this so badly I can't see a way out." Rachel didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped closer, her expression softening. "Amelia, I know you're under pressure. But please, think carefully. This man is dangerous. He's not someone you can just walk away from once the deal is done. He's not like the people we're used to dealing with." Amelia swallowed hard. "I know. But it's the only way. It's either this, or I lose everything." "Everything." Rachel sighed deeply, her eyes filled with concern. "I get it. But you have to promise me that you won't let this decision haunt you. Promise me that you won't do something you'll regret. Whatever happens, I'm here for you. Just don't make a decision you'll hate yourself for later." Amelia nodded, but the truth was, she didn't know if she could live with herself, regardless of the choice she made. She wasn't sure how she would feel once it was done. She didn't even know how she would feel the next day. But one thing was certain, she couldn't walk away from this. Not anymore. After Rachel left, Amelia sat on the couch, staring out the window at the city below. The weight of the decision felt suffocating. Tobias had offered her an escape, but at what cost? What kind of life could she build after that? What kind of woman would she be? Would she still be herself, or would she become someone else entirely, someone who had given up her soul for a chance at survival? She had 24 hours to make a decision. 24 hours to decide if she was willing to sell herself to save everything she loved. And even though the path ahead was clear, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something far bigger than anything she had anticipated. She wasn't just fighting for her father's company anymore, she was fighting for her own future, for the woman she was and the woman she might become. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Amelia knew that the moment had come. Tomorrow, she would make her decision. And after that, there would be no going back. The day after Amelia's conversation with Rachel, everything seemed to blur together. The ticking clock, the weight of her mounting debts, the unrelenting pressure to make the right decision, it was all too much. She couldn't think clearly anymore. Each passing hour felt like it was crushing her, pushing her deeper into a corner with no escape. Her mind kept returning to Tobias's offer, and no matter how much she tried to push it away, the reality of what she needed to do was inescapable. She had made the decision the night before, but that didn't mean she felt any more certain about it. She kept playing the scenario over and over in her mind, trying to find a way out, trying to justify her choice. Could she really go through with it? Could she let a man like Tobias Stone take control of her life, even if it meant saving her company? The problem wasn't just the business anymore. It wasn't just the legacy her father had built or the debts that were suffocating her. It was the fact that she felt like she was giving up everything she had ever believed in. It was as though she was about to cross a line she could never uncross. And that terrified her. At noon, the doorbell rang, snapping Amelia from her thoughts. She didn't need to check the clock to know that the time had come. It had been 24 hours since Tobias's offer, 24 hours since he had given her the ultimatum, one night, one child, and then she would be free. The moment she had been dreading had arrived. She opened the door slowly, her breath shallow. Standing there, in the bright sunlight that poured over the threshold, was Tobias. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his green eyes as piercing as ever, his expression unreadable. The man exuded power, a presence that was impossible to ignore. And for the first time, Amelia realized just how much of an impact he had on her. "I'm here," he said simply, his voice smooth as always. "Are you ready?" Amelia swallowed hard, her heart thumping in her chest. "Ready for what?" she asked, her words coming out barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure what she expected, but the answer seemed to hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. What did it mean to be ready for something like this? Tobias stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the room as if he owned every inch of it. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, as if he were trying to gauge her reaction, as if he could read every flicker of doubt or fear in her eyes. "You know what this is, Amelia," he said, his voice low, almost affectionate. "You've made your decision, and now it's time to follow through. No more second-guessing. No more doubt." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she wasn't sure, that she hadn't fully accepted what he was offering. But the words got caught in her throat. The truth was, she had made the decision. She had known, deep down, that it was the only way out. She couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hoping for something that wasn't coming. "I haven't changed my mind," she said, her voice steady despite the tremble that still lingered in her hands. "I'll do it." Tobias's lips curved into a slight smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good," he said, his voice tinged with approval. "We'll do this on my terms, of course." She didn't respond. What was there to say? He had already made it clear what the terms were. It was business. Nothing more. Nothing less. Without another word, he reached for her hand and led her down the hallway to a room she had never entered before. The door opened to a private, dimly lit space with high windows that offered a sweeping view of the city below. The room was simple yet elegant, a perfect reflection of the man who had invited her into his life, his world. There was a king-sized bed at the center, the sheets crisp and white, and soft lighting that made the entire room feel strangely intimate. It was hard to think of this as a business transaction when everything about the room, the atmosphere, was designed to break down every wall she had carefully constructed over the years. It was hard to think of this as anything but personal. Tobias turned to face her once they were inside, his gaze never leaving hers. The room seemed to shrink as he stepped closer, the air growing thick with an unspoken tension. For a moment, Amelia wanted to run, wanted to escape this reality, to find a way out of the situation that she had trapped herself in. But there was no escape now. The choice had already been made. "You're beautiful, Amelia," Tobias said quietly, his voice soft but unmistakably serious. "You have no idea how much I've been looking forward to this." She could feel the heat rising to her face, a flush of embarrassment and confusion flooding her. She had been prepared for a cold transaction, a simple exchange of services, but Tobias's words were stirring something in her, something that she wasn't sure she was ready to feel. She looked away, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them in front of her. "I'm not here for compliments, Tobias," she said, her voice steady but edged with a sharpness she wasn't sure she even believed. "I'm here to do what we agreed on. Nothing more. Nothing less." Tobias didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for her, his hand warm as it gently cupped her cheek, tilting her face toward him. His touch was surprisingly tender, and it disarmed her in a way she hadn't anticipated. "You think this is just a transaction, don't you?" he asked, his voice quiet. "But it's not. It's never been about just one night, Amelia. It's about us, about what happens after. What we build from this." Amelia felt a sharp pang in her chest at his words. He was right. This wasn't just a business deal, not really. It was something far more complicated, far more dangerous. She could see it in his eyes, the way he looked at her, as though she were something he wanted to claim, something he could control. The thought sent a shiver through her. "I told you, I'm here for one reason only," she said, her voice almost a whisper now. "Once this is over, we're done." Tobias stepped closer, his lips brushing against her forehead in a soft kiss that sent a wave of warmth through her. "We'll see," he murmured. "We'll see what happens after." The kiss wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, an unspoken understanding that she couldn't deny. And in that moment, Amelia realized that the night ahead was going to change everything. Not just for her, but for both of them. As Tobias began to undo the buttons of her blouse, his movements slow and deliberate, Amelia felt a strange mix of emotions flood through her, fear, anticipation, uncertainty. She had prepared herself for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the way it felt to be this close to him, to know that the one night she had agreed to was about to unfold in a way that would change the course of her life. The air between them was electric, charged with tension that neither of them could deny. And despite her better judgment, despite the doubts that still lingered in the back of her mind, Amelia realized that she was falling into something far deeper than she had intended. She wasn't just here for the transaction anymore. She was here for something else, something she hadn't been ready to face. And as Tobias's lips finally found hers, it felt like the beginning of something neither of them could escape. The days that followed the night she'd agreed to Tobias's proposal felt like a fog. Amelia went through the motions, her body moving as if it were on autopilot, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in the quiet aftermath of what she had done. What they had done. She hadn't expected the physical act of it to leave such an impact on her. The night had been far from what she'd imagined. It wasn't just a transaction, a cold exchange of services. The emotions, the intimacy that had been shared, had woven a complicated thread between them. Amelia had thought she could compartmentalize it, lock it away in a box and throw away the key. She had told herself that this was just a way out, a means to an end, nothing more. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something had shifted between her and Tobias Stone that night. She couldn't shake it. And worse, she didn't know how to process it. She had spent the last few days avoiding him, burying herself in the company's affairs, in the endless paperwork that seemed to grow every time she glanced away. But the weight of the debt was still there, always pressing on her chest, and even with Tobias's money, there were other things she had to handle, things that she didn't have the luxury of ignoring. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the feeling that Tobias was still with her, that his presence lingered in the corners of her mind. It was like a whisper, a tug at her conscience. The phone call came on the third day, just as Amelia was about to close her office for the night. She had spent hours reviewing contracts with her team and trying to figure out how to restructure the company to make it more sustainable. There was so much work to be done, and it seemed like it would never end. But when the name, Tobias Stone, flashed on her screen, she froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. It wasn't that she didn't expect him to reach out, it was inevitable, but she hadn't prepared herself for it. For a moment, she considered not answering. After all, their agreement had been clear. She had done what he asked, and now, in her mind, that was the end of it. But deep down, she knew that was an impossible thought. Tobias Stone didn't let things go so easily. And if she was honest with herself, there was still that strange pull, that inexplicable connection between them. So, she took a deep breath and swiped to answer. Amelia, Tobias's voice came through the line, smooth and confident as always. I trust you've had some time to think about our arrangement. She sat back in her chair, her hands instinctively wrapping around the edge of the desk. I've had time, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. And the company is secure now, so thank you for that. Good, he said, his voice darkening slightly. But I want you to understand something. This isn't over. You and I are not done. Amelia's heart skipped a beat, the weight of his words sinking in. She had expected him to simply move on, to leave her to deal with the aftermath, but his tone was far from casual. It was assertive, possessive. What do you mean? She asked, trying to keep the edge out of her voice, though she couldn't hide the curiosity creeping in. You're mine, Amelia, Tobias said, as if the statement was self-explanatory. Whether you want to admit it or not, the night we shared, it changed things. And now, I'm not going to let you walk away. Amelia's pulse quickened, but she refused to let it show. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk, her grip tight around the phone. I did what you asked. You got what you wanted. I don't know what else there is to say. You know very well there's more to this than just a one-time transaction, Tobias replied, his voice low and dangerous. I've made my offer, Amelia, and I'm not backing down. You owe me now, and I'm not about to let you fade into the background. You're going to be mine, in more ways than you realize. Whether you like it or not. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. There it was again, the power he held over her, the control that he seemed to relish. She could feel the tension building in her chest as she processed what he was saying. I'm not your possession, Tobias, she shot back, her voice sharper now. We had a deal. One night. You get what you wanted, and that's it. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't that simple. Tobias's words weren't just empty threats, they were a promise. And Amelia realized, with an unsettling clarity, that she had underestimated him. She had thought that after the night was over, she would walk away from him without consequence. But now, it was clear that Tobias wasn't the type of man who let things go easily. I didn't make you a promise, Amelia. I made a deal. And deals can be renegotiated, he replied. I'm going to need more from you. And when I need something, I expect you to follow through. She clenched her jaw, trying to steady her breath. The fear and confusion that had been lurking beneath the surface finally broke free. She was trapped in his world now, and she didn't know how to escape it. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, feeling more vulnerable than she had ever been in her life. Tobias's tone softened, as though he had been waiting for her to ask the question. "I want you to stay with me, Amelia. Not for just one night, but for as long as I need you. You've already proven that you're willing to do whatever it takes to save your company, and now, I need you to prove that you're willing to do whatever it takes for me." Amelia's heart raced as the full weight of his words settled in. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It wasn't just about saving her family's legacy. It was about something far more personal, something she wasn't prepared for. Tobias wasn't asking for her compliance. He was demanding it. And with every passing second, she realized how little control she truly had over her life. "I won't be your toy, Tobias," she said, though her voice trembled despite her best efforts to stay firm. "You're not my toy, Amelia," he replied, his voice tinged with something darker. "You're my choice. And I don't make decisions lightly." Amelia felt the weight of those words in her chest. She wasn't just another woman to him. He wasn't just using her for his own gain. He had chosen her, chosen to make her part of his world, whether she liked it or not. And no matter how much she wanted to walk away from this, part of her couldn't help but wonder if she was already too far gone. "I'll give you time to think about it," Tobias said, his voice softening ever so slightly. "But know this, Amelia, once you've made your choice, there's no turning back." The line went dead, and Amelia sat there, staring at the phone in her hand as her pulse raced. It felt like the room had been sucked out of her, and she was left suspended, unable to breathe. Tobias Stone wasn't just a man with money. He was a man with power, with control. And now, she was in his grip, whether she liked it or not. For the first time since their initial deal, Amelia felt completely powerless. And she had no idea what to do next. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Amelia could barely focus on anything other than the conversation she had just had with Tobias. His words kept swirling in her mind, his promise, his threats, his desire to control her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that no matter how much she tried to push him out of her life, Tobias would not be so easily dismissed. He had planted himself firmly in her world, and she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to fight him. The next morning, she woke up to the cold reality that her life had irrevocably changed. She had made a decision the night she agreed to his terms, but now, as she faced the consequences of that decision, she felt trapped. What she had thought would be a clean break was now a tangled web she didn't know how to navigate. She had given Tobias what he wanted, one night. But now, the real test began. Would she be able to maintain control over her life, or would she be pulled further into his world, losing herself in the process? Only time would tell. And for the first time in her life, Amelia realized that the stakes were higher than she ever could have imagined. The days following her conversation with Tobias Stone felt like a blur of uncertainty and confusion. Amelia had always prided herself on her ability to stay in control, to make calculated decisions, and to keep her emotions at bay. But ever since she had agreed to his terms, the world she had carefully built around her had begun to unravel. The initial shock had started to wear off, but the reality of her decision still hung over her like a heavy fog. Every moment of the day, whether she was working at the office or at home, Tobias's words replayed in her mind. "You're mine, Amelia." The promise, the assertion, it was chilling, but at the same time, there was a part of her that couldn't deny how it had affected her. That night, that one night, had left a mark. It wasn't just the physicality of it, it was the raw emotion, the intensity, that had felt so different than anything she had expected. She had tried to distance herself from him, telling herself it was nothing more than a business transaction, nothing more than an agreement to pay off her father's debts. But every time she found herself thinking about him, it became clear that it was more than that. Tobias had become an unavoidable presence in her life. Amelia had spent the past few days trying to focus on the company. She had meetings, calls with the investors, and legal matters to deal with. But even amidst the flurry of tasks, there was an undeniable feeling that Tobias was still there, watching, waiting, and controlling the direction of her life in ways she hadn't anticipated. She couldn't help but wonder what he wanted from her now. It wasn't until the evening of the 5th day after their meeting that she got the answer. She was sitting in her office, the desk cluttered with paperwork that she hadn't been able to finish the night before. The office was dimly lit, the city lights streaming through the windows, casting long shadows over the room. She had been working on a particularly complex contract when the phone on her desk buzzed. She looked down at the caller ID, and her stomach twisted. It was Tobias. She hesitated for a moment, the dread slowly creeping up her spine, but she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. With a deep breath, she picked up the receiver. "Amelia," Tobias's voice came through, deep and smooth as always. "How are you today?" She frowned, her fingers tightening around the phone. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice betraying more frustration than she had intended. "What do you want, Tobias?" There was a pause on the other end, and when he spoke again, it was with an almost amused tone. "You're still angry, I see. It's all right, I expected that. But you need to stop running from this. You've made your choice, and now it's time to accept the consequences." Amelia gritted her teeth. "I haven't been running from anything, Tobias. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to just bend to your will." "You don't have a choice in this, Amelia," Tobias said, his voice suddenly more serious, commanding. "The night we shared, it wasn't just a business arrangement. You can try to convince yourself otherwise, but I know you felt it too. You can't pretend it didn't happen. You can't pretend I don't have a hold on you now." Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine at his words. There was a part of her that hated how accurate he was, how perceptive he seemed to be about the turmoil she was feeling. She wanted to argue, to tell him that he was wrong, that she was still in control of her own life. But the truth was, she wasn't sure anymore. The lines had blurred, and the sense of ownership Tobias had claimed over her had left a mark she wasn't prepared for. "I'm not a prize to be won, Tobias," she said, trying to steady her breath, her words a little sharper than she meant. "This was a deal. Nothing more. You got what you wanted. And now, I'm done." Another silence stretched between them, and Amelia could feel her pulse quicken, her hands clammy. She had expected Tobias to argue, to convince her that this wasn't over, but what he said next completely caught her off guard. "Come to dinner with me tonight," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "We need to talk." Amelia opened her mouth to protest, to refuse, but before she could speak, Tobias continued. "I've arranged everything. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Come to dinner, and we'll discuss how we move forward." She felt a knot form in her stomach. The control he had over her life, over the decisions she made, was suffocating. It was clear that Tobias wasn't just going to let her walk away from this. No matter how much she wanted to end it, he had other plans. She could already sense that the talk he was referring to wasn't going to be about her father's company, or the debt, or even the business agreement they had made. It would be something else, something far more personal. "I'll be there," she said finally, though her voice betrayed her reluctance. "But I'm not changing my mind." "I don't expect you to," Tobias replied smoothly. "But I don't think you'll leave tonight the same way you came." The line went dead before she could respond, and Amelia sat in stunned silence for a moment. The sense of dread settled into her chest as she set the phone down, her mind racing. She knew Tobias, and he didn't do things without purpose. The dinner wasn't just a formality. It wasn't just about finalizing some arrangement, it was about something else entirely. Something she wasn't ready for. She had no idea what Tobias had in mind for their meeting, but part of her knew it wouldn't be something she could simply walk away from. Later that evening, Amelia found herself standing in front of the mirror in her apartment, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of uncertainty and curiosity. She wasn't sure what she expected from Tobias, but she knew it wasn't going to be simple. She had already given him so much, her company, her peace of mind, her sense of control, and now, it seemed he wanted more. How far would he push her? How much would she give in? When she arrived at the upscale restaurant, a posh, candlelit place that catered to Manhattan's elite, the weight of her decision settled even more heavily on her. The hostess led her to a private booth in the back of the restaurant, where Tobias was already waiting. He stood as she approached, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. But there was something unreadable in his eyes, something that made her feel as if she were walking into a trap she couldn't see. "Amelia," he greeted her, his voice as smooth as ever. "I'm glad you came." She nodded, taking her seat across from him. There was no small talk, no pleasantries. Tobias went straight to the point, just as he always did. "I've been thinking," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "about what happens after tonight. You've proven yourself, Amelia. You've made your choice, and I'm not going to make this easy for you. But I do expect you to follow through. You agreed to more than just a business deal when we made our arrangement." Amelia's heart raced, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I didn't agree to anything other than clearing my debts," she said, her voice firm, though inside, she could feel the cracks beginning to form. She wasn't sure what he meant by follow through, but she was terrified of finding out. Tobias leaned back in his chair, studying her with a quiet intensity. "You're not walking away from this. Not now, not ever. The night we shared was just the beginning, Amelia. You can pretend it was just a transaction, but we both know it was more. It's time to admit that." The words felt like a punch to her gut. Amelia knew Tobias wasn't wrong, but admitting it out loud was something else entirely. She could feel the walls she had built up around herself begin to crumble with each word he spoke. "I don't want to be a part of your game, Tobias," she said, the words sharp but shaky. "I'm done playing along. This was supposed to be a way out, not a way in." His smile widened, but there was no warmth in it, only a quiet understanding that made Amelia's skin crawl. "That's where you're wrong, Amelia," he said softly, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't about a game. It's about ownership. And you're mine now." A shiver ran down her spine as she realized just how deep she was entangled in his world. This wasn't over. And for the first time, Amelia feared it might never be. As the night unfolded, Tobias's presence was inescapable, and with each passing moment, Amelia found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about control, power, and desire. The days after her dinner with Tobias were a blur of confusion and emotional turmoil. Amelia found herself in a place she hadn't anticipated, a place where she wasn't sure who she was anymore. The woman who had walked into that dinner had been firm, determined to stick to her own terms, to find a way out of the web Tobias had spun around her. But the woman who walked out was different. She was unsure, fractured, and more entangled in his world than she had ever imagined. Tobias had made it clear that this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about something far more personal, something she couldn't escape. The morning after their dinner, Amelia woke up with a feeling of dread hanging over her. She had hoped that the fog would clear, that the clarity she so desperately needed would come to her, but instead, she felt even more confused. She went through her morning routine mechanically, not really processing what she was doing. It was all a blur. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Tobias, his words, his touch, the way he had looked at her, as if she were already his, as if she were already bound to him. She hated how powerless she felt in that moment, how she had let him so easily slip under her skin. She had to keep her head straight. She had promised herself that she wouldn't let him have control over her life, that she wouldn't let the night they shared change anything. But the reality was, it already had. She could feel it in every conversation, in every task at the office. The unease was building up in her chest, tightening with every passing minute. The phone call came just as she was sitting down to her desk. Her hand hovered over the phone for a moment, dread pooling in her stomach. It was Tobias. She had hoped, foolishly, that maybe, just maybe, he would give her space to think, to breathe. But she knew that wasn't how Tobias operated. He didn't wait for things to happen. He made them happen. Amelia, his voice was smooth, as usual, but there was something different in it this time. A certainty that sent a shiver down her spine. We need to meet again. I'm busy today, she replied, trying to sound firm. But her voice faltered, betraying her. I have work to do, Tobias. I know, he replied, his voice low, almost amused. But this isn't about work. You know exactly what this is about. She swallowed hard, the words catching in her throat. What do you want, Tobias? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he answered. You. Her stomach churned. I'm not interested in anything more from you, she said, though deep down, she could feel the lie rolling off her tongue. It wasn't true. It hadn't been true for a while now. She wasn't sure how or when it had happened, but Tobias had slipped under her defenses without her even realizing it. You're not the one who decides, Amelia, Tobias said, his voice suddenly colder. I told you, you're mine. And I will have you. Don't fight this. She flinched at the sharpness in his tone, but before she could say anything, he continued. I've made arrangements for us to meet. You don't have a choice in the matter. I'll send a car for you in an hour. Don't keep me waiting. The line went dead before she could respond. Amelia sat there, staring at the phone, her heart racing. She wanted to argue with him, to tell him that she didn't belong to anyone, that she had a life outside of whatever twisted world he was trying to pull her into. But the truth was, she was scared. She was scared of how much he had already affected her, how much of a grip he had on her life. And no matter how much she wanted to fight it, part of her felt like she didn't have the strength to resist him. The car arrived exactly an hour later, as Tobias had promised. She got in without hesitation, though every fiber of her being screamed for her to turn around, to walk away, to take back control of her life. But she couldn't. Not anymore. The pull of his presence, the weight of his promises, was too strong. It was as if she had already been dragged too far into his world, and now there was no turning back. The drive to the meeting place was silent, the tension in the air palpable. She couldn't stop the thoughts swirling in her head, thoughts of Tobias, of what he wanted from her, and of what would happen next. She had no idea what he had planned, but a part of her feared it wouldn't be anything good. Tobias had a way of getting what he wanted, and once he set his sights on something, it was impossible to escape. When the car finally stopped, Amelia was led into an upscale, private dining room in a luxurious hotel, a place that felt more like a personal prison than a restaurant. It was intimate, almost suffocating, the air thick with unspoken tension. Tobias was already there, sitting at a table set for two. His gaze lifted from his phone when he saw her enter, and for a moment, Amelia saw something flicker in his eyes. Something predatory, something dangerous. And yet, there was a flicker of something else there too, something that made her heart beat faster. She didn't know what to expect from him anymore. She didn't know if the man sitting at the table was the same person who had promised her everything just days ago or if she was meeting a side of him that was far darker, far more controlling. Sit, Tobias said, his voice soft, almost inviting, as he motioned to the empty seat across from him. Amelia hesitated for a moment before walking over and sitting down. The room was quiet, and the waitstaff quickly brought drinks, something expensive, no doubt, but Amelia barely noticed. Her mind was still on the conversation she'd had with Tobias earlier, and the tension between them had only grown. She wasn't sure what game he was playing, but she could feel his presence weighing heavily on her, like a shadow in the room. I trust you've been thinking about what I said, Tobias began, his voice low, but the authority in it was unmistakable. I told you, you belong to me now. And I expect you to follow through on your part of the deal. She swallowed hard, not wanting to admit that, deep down, part of her already had. I've already done what you asked, she said, her voice firm but betraying a hint of uncertainty. I've paid my debts. My company is safe. You've gotten what you wanted. Tobias leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. That's not the only thing I want from you, Amelia, he said, his words laced with an unmistakable promise. And you know it. I've been patient, but now it's time for you to step up. You're mine, and I'm not letting you walk away from this. Not yet. She felt a shiver crawl up her spine. There was no mistaking the determination in his eyes, the way he looked at her, as if he were deciding how to mold her into something he wanted. Something he needed. Amelia's heart beat faster, her hands clenching around the glass of wine in front of her. I'm not your possession, she said, though the words felt weak even to her own ears. Tobias's lips curled into a small, almost knowing smile. You think you can still walk away, but you're already too deep, Amelia. I have you. I've always had you. The words hit her harder than she expected. She wasn't sure whether to be angry, terrified, or something else entirely. She had thought she could maintain control, that she could use him to save her company and then walk away without looking back. But now she realized the truth. Tobias didn't just want her cooperation. He wanted her, all of her, and he was going to make sure she couldn't escape. Not until he had what he needed. She looked at him, a mix of emotions rushing through her. What do you want from me, Tobias? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Tobias's expression softened, but it was still commanding. I want everything from you, Amelia. And I'm going to make sure I get it. For a moment, everything stood still, and Amelia knew that the moment she had feared was finally here. The moment when Tobias Stone would take control of her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. And the worst part was, she was starting to realize that, no matter how hard she tried to fight it, she was already too far gone. The days that followed that dinner with Tobias Stone felt like an endless storm cloud hanging over Amelia. She couldn't escape it, the tension, the lingering thoughts of the words he had spoken, the weight of the decision she had made. She kept telling herself that she was in control, that she was doing what was necessary to secure her future and protect her father's legacy. But the truth was, she wasn't sure of anything anymore. What had started as a desperate, calculated move had turned into something far more complicated. Something she hadn't anticipated. Every time Amelia thought about the night they shared, the agreement, the child, the price she had paid, she felt a mix of fear and guilt. She had convinced herself that it was just a transaction, a necessary step to clear her debts and move on with her life. But that night, when Tobias had touched her, kissed her, when they had crossed that line, it was impossible to pretend it was just a business deal. There had been something deeper in it, something she hadn't expected, a spark, a connection that neither of them had prepared for. She had been avoiding him since their dinner. Tobias had made it clear that he wasn't finished with her, but she had hoped, foolishly, that time would create some distance between them, that she could return to her life without him continuously looming over her. But she was wrong. Tobias didn't give up so easily. She knew that now. He had a hold on her, whether she wanted to admit it or not. It was late in the afternoon when she got the call. She had been working, trying to distract herself from everything, when her phone buzzed on the desk. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. Tobias Stone. She almost didn't answer, but something stopped her. She needed to hear what he had to say, even if she didn't want to. Reluctantly, she swiped to accept the call. Amelia, Tobias's voice greeted her, smooth as always, but there was something in his tone that made her uneasy. I need you to come to my office. Now. Her breath hitched. I'm busy, she replied quickly, but even as she said it, she knew she couldn't ignore him. Not anymore. I don't think you understand, Amelia, he said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. This is no longer optional. You'll come. I'll send a car to pick you up. The way he said it, with such finality, sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't a request. It was a command. She could feel her heart racing, her stomach tightening. She didn't want to go, didn't want to face him again, but she knew she had no choice. Tobias had already invaded her life, and now there was no escaping it. She reluctantly agreed. Fine. I'll be there. The car arrived shortly after, and she could barely find the energy to move as she climbed in. The ride to Tobias's office felt suffocating, every minute stretching longer than the last. When she arrived, the sleek, glass building loomed in front of her, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside her. Tobias's office was on the top floor, and the moment the elevator doors opened, she was hit with the same cold, impersonal atmosphere that always seemed to surround him. His office was minimalist, all dark wood and glass, and it felt like a space designed for business only, not for emotions, not for people. But that's what Tobias was, wasn't he? A man who saw the world as a series of transactions, a game of power and control. He was standing by the large windows when she entered, his back to her, looking out at the city below. He didn't turn when she stepped into the room, but she could feel his eyes on her as she walked inside. The air between them seemed to crackle with an energy that she couldn't ignore. She felt small in his presence, like she was nothing more than a pawn in a game that was much larger than her. "You wanted me here," she said, trying to sound confident, but her voice wavered. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something she wasn't prepared for. Tobias finally turned to face her, his piercing green eyes locking onto hers. His gaze was unreadable, but there was an intensity in it that made her heart race. "I've been patient, Amelia," he said, his voice calm, but his words carried a weight. "But it's time to move forward." She tilted her head, her curiosity piqued despite the growing anxiety inside her. "Move forward with what?" she asked, though she was almost afraid of the answer. Tobias stepped closer, his presence overwhelming as he closed the distance between them. "You're mine," he said, his voice low and unwavering. "And I won't let you go. Not yet." His words landed like a blow, and she had to take a step back to steady herself. "I'm not yours," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "I agreed to the deal. That's all." Tobias didn't flinch. "You don't get to decide that anymore, Amelia," he replied, his voice sharp. "You've already given me a piece of you. And once you've given it, it's impossible to take it back. I'm not letting you go, not without getting what I want." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to argue, to push him away, but a part of her, the part she had tried so hard to suppress, knew that Tobias was right. She had already crossed the line. She had already given him something she couldn't take back. "You don't own me," she said, her voice weaker this time, her defiance slipping. "This was supposed to be a way out. I paid my debt, I did what you wanted. Now I'm free." Tobias's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "You really think that's all it is? You think I'll let you walk away after everything?" She didn't answer, because deep down, she already knew the truth. She had never been free. She had never been in control. Tobias had made sure of that. He took a step forward, his presence overwhelming as he stood right in front of her. "I've been patient," he said again, his voice low and almost gentle. "But now it's time for you to understand that I'm not like the others. You can't run from me, Amelia. You can't escape what we've started." His fingers brushed lightly against her arm, sending a jolt of electricity through her body. She flinched, but he didn't pull away. Instead, his hand lingered there, and for a moment, she felt the weight of his touch. "You're not going anywhere," he continued, his voice darkening. "You belong to me now. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner we can move on." Amelia wanted to fight him, to push him away, but every word he spoke made it feel like she was sinking deeper into something she couldn't control. She had wanted to believe that she could walk away from him, that she could get her life back. But Tobias had already embedded himself into her world in ways she couldn't explain. "I didn't agree to this," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as though speaking it out loud would make it real. "This isn't what I wanted." Tobias's eyes softened, but only for a moment. His hand moved to her cheek, his touch so gentle it sent a wave of warmth through her. "I know, Amelia," he said softly. "But this is what you need. This is what we need. You can't fight it. You'll learn to trust me, to need me. Just like I need you." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Amelia stood there, caught in the web of his words, trapped in the pull of his presence. She knew she was too far gone. She couldn't fight it anymore. Not when the pull of Tobias's power over her was so consuming. Tobias leaned in then, his lips brushing against her ear in a gesture that was both tender and commanding. "I'm not letting you go, Amelia," he whispered, his breath hot against her skin. "You're mine now. And there's no turning back." A shiver ran down her spine, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. Because despite every ounce of resistance she had left, despite every piece of her that screamed for freedom, a part of her knew that she had already given him what he wanted. And now, there was no escaping the storm that was about to consume them both. As Tobias's lips found hers, the kiss was gentle at first, slow and deliberate, as if he was savoring every moment. But as the kiss deepened, Amelia felt herself giving in. She wasn't just a pawn in his game anymore. She was a willing participant, caught in the fire of desire that she couldn't control. The night stretched on, and Amelia realized that no matter how much she fought it, Tobias Stone had become a force in her life that she couldn't outrun. And as she surrendered to him, part of her wondered if she had ever really wanted to. The weeks after that night with Tobias were a blur of emotions, confusion, and a deep sense of inevitability that Amelia couldn't shake. Every day felt like she was walking through a fog, and the weight of her decisions hung heavily on her shoulders. She had promised herself that the night they shared would be a one-time thing, an arrangement to secure her father's legacy, to clear her debts. But deep down, she knew she had crossed a line. Tobias had become an inescapable part of her life, and the more she tried to distance herself from him, the more she felt the pull of his presence. Tobias wasn't just a man of business, a billionaire whose power seemed endless, he was a man who understood the art of control in every way. Amelia had underestimated him when she thought she could walk away, that she could remain untouched by the storm that surrounded him. He had made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't going to let her go easily. The thought of being free of him seemed more and more like a distant fantasy as the days passed. She kept herself busy, throwing herself into her work. The company was stable for now, thanks to Tobias's intervention, but she couldn't ignore the underlying tension in every corner of her life. The fact that Tobias had made her part of his world, his personal world, was something she hadn't expected. He had claimed a piece of her, whether she liked it or not, and no matter how hard she tried to push him out, he always seemed to find his way back in. The truth was, she had tried to avoid him. She hadn't answered his calls, hadn't returned his messages, hoping that the distance would give her the space she needed to think. But Tobias wasn't a man who played by the same rules as everyone else. He didn't let people slip away that easily. And so, it was no surprise when the call came again. This time, though, she didn't hesitate. There was a sharpness in his voice that told her he wasn't asking for her presence anymore. "Amelia," Tobias said when she picked up the phone. His voice was low, almost dangerous. "I told you I wouldn't let you walk away. And I meant it. I want to see you tonight. Don't make me come to you." Her heart pounded in her chest as she listened. It wasn't a request. It was an order. She had no choice but to comply. She knew better than to ignore him now. "Where?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, betraying her hesitation. "The penthouse," he replied, and she could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "I'll have a car sent for you." The line went dead before she could even respond, and Amelia was left staring at the phone in her hand, her pulse racing. She had tried to avoid this. She had tried to pretend that she could carry on with her life, that she could walk away from him without looking back. But Tobias had a way of making his presence felt, even when he wasn't physically near. It wasn't just the power he held over her, it was the way he seemed to reach into the very core of her and pull her into his world without her even realizing it. The car came, as promised, and Amelia didn't hesitate to get in. There was no point in fighting anymore. She had long ago stopped pretending she was in control. The moment Tobias had entered her life, she had known things would change. She just hadn't realized how much, or how quickly. The drive to his penthouse felt endless, the city lights flashing by as she stared out the window, lost in her thoughts. Her mind kept circling back to that night, to the way Tobias had made her feel, like she was both his captive and his equal, his lover and his prisoner. There was a dark allure in the way he took control, a magnetic pull that she couldn't resist, no matter how much she tried to. When the car finally stopped, she was led into the building, the familiar scent of luxury surrounding her as she made her way to the elevator. She wasn't sure what to expect when the doors opened, but her heart was pounding with anticipation, and a strange feeling of dread lingered in her chest. She had given in to him once, but would it be the same this time? Was this just another way for him to further assert his dominance over her, or was it something more? The elevator doors slid open, and there he was, Tobias, standing in the middle of the room, his back to her. His presence was commanding, as always, but tonight, there was something different about him. He was waiting for her. "Amelia," he said, his voice soft, almost too soft, as he turned to face her. His gaze was intense, piercing, but there was something in his eyes that was almost gentle. For the first time, she saw a vulnerability in him, something raw and unguarded. It caught her off guard. "You came," he said, his lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't have much of a choice," she replied, her voice steady but betraying a hint of nervousness. "You made sure of that." Tobias stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're right. I made sure." His voice was a whisper now, almost tender. "But you're here now. And that's all that matters." Amelia swallowed hard. She could feel the tension between them, thick and palpable, as if the very air in the room was charged with something more than just desire. She didn't know how to respond. Every part of her wanted to step away, to tell him that she wasn't his to control, that she didn't belong to him. But the truth was, she already had given him a piece of herself, and there was no taking it back. "I don't belong to you, Tobias," she said quietly, her voice trembling despite herself. What you're doing, this isn't me. It's not who I am." Tobias's expression softened, and he reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch sent a shock of warmth through her, and she fought the urge to lean into it. She couldn't afford to be weak, not now. "You belong to me in ways you don't even understand yet, Amelia," he said softly, his voice almost hypnotic. "And whether you admit it or not, you know that you need me. You always have." She looked up at him, her heart racing. His words were like a spell, laced with something she couldn't identify. The truth was, she didn't know what she needed anymore. She had told herself that all of this was just temporary, a means to an end, but now, standing here in front of him, she wasn't sure of anything. "I'm not your possession, Tobias," she said, but the words felt hollow now. She had said them 100 times before, but now they didn't have the same weight. She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him, or herself. "No," he replied, his tone changing, growing more serious. "You're not my possession, Amelia. But you're mine, and I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever." His words hung in the air, thick with promise. The intensity of his gaze, the way he was looking at her as though he could see into her very soul, it was almost too much to bear. She had always prided herself on being in control of her life, her choices, but now, in the face of Tobias's certainty, she felt small, insignificant, like a pawn in a game she had no idea how to play. He stepped closer, his lips brushing lightly against her forehead. "You're not alone in this anymore, Amelia. I won't let you face this world on your own." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She wasn't going to let him see how much his words were affecting her. She wasn't going to let him see how deeply he had already gotten under her skin. "I don't need your help," she whispered, but even she didn't believe it. "You do," Tobias said softly, his lips hovering near hers now, his breath warm against her skin. "And I'm going to make sure you get everything you need. Whether you like it or not." The moment stretched between them, the silence thick with anticipation. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as Tobias's lips finally found hers, his kiss gentle at first, almost too tender, before it deepened, sending a rush of heat through her. The kiss wasn't just an embrace of desire, it was a claiming, a possession. And for the first time, Amelia realized that she wasn't just caught in his world. She was part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. And as they stood there, tangled in each other's arms, Amelia understood that there was no escape. Not anymore. Tobias had woven himself so deeply into the fabric of her life that she wasn't sure where he ended and she began. This was the price she had paid, and the price she would continue to pay, for the rest of her life.